In today's episode, we speak with Ani Sanyal, CEO of Kolkata Chai Co. Ani and his brother Ayan have successfully brought a piece of Kolkata to the bustling streets of New York City. With 2 brick-and-mortar locations in Nolita and East Village, along with a booming CPG product, Kolkata Chai has reached the impressive milestone of 7+ figures in revenue. Kolkata Chai is inspired by their childhood as first-generation Indian Americans, blending 90s American culture with traditional Kolkata experiences. In this episode, we'll learn about what it takes to build a successful chai company, such as when and how to raise funding, leveraging brick and mortar stores as a viral flywheel effect, managing a CPG product while maintaining consistency, working on a business with your sibling, and more. Without further ado, let's get right into the show. There's like a full list of stuff that you do, and obviously being a partner, I'm very curious about that partner in the Taiga Park development, as well as managing an artist, board member of of a basketball community, sort of deal. Uh, that's a lot of stuff to be doing, but more importantly, being CEO of 2 companies, and one of that's the Green Room Creative, and the other one, of course, that Ron just mentioned, Kolkata Chai Co. So was just curious, like it's 10 in the morning. What does your day already look like? Being CEO for those 2 companies.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be super honest. Nowadays, I would say 90% of my time is focused on Kolkata Chai, if not 95% of my time. So I still touch a lot of different things. I'm still, I still own all of the properties and all the things that I do. But Kolkata Chai is in a special place in terms of growth and just kind of where it is as a company. And so it's kind of required me to go full time, super full time. And so I'm lucky to have a team on the agency side that can manage Green Room Creative and kind of manage our clients and keep our standards high. I still do manage an artist, and we've brought in a co-manager. So again, just making sure that anything that I'm doing, I'm giving it 110. But more importantly, uh, yeah, it's a lot of organization and a lot of delegation, and so that's part of what being a good leader I think evolves into. And so my day is a lot of waking up and figuring out, who's going into battle with me today, so to speak, and organizing myself to make sure I'm ready for that.
Yeah, and did you start, I'm guessing, the Green Room first and the other stuff, then Kolkata eventually became something, or just curious what that timeline looked like?
Yeah, it's a great question. My brother and I started Green Room Creative in about 2016, 2017, and it was the heyday of kind of direct to consumer, and we call it DTC 1.0. And so we learned a ton of institutional and just like anecdotal and just being outside, so to speak, uh, and really touching brands and being involved with stuff that was very early stage. And when we decided to test and kind of incubate Kolkata Chai, we did it within Green Room Creative. So we were using our agency services, whether it was photographers and, using the strategies that we had built for other companies, kind of applying it internally. And then, I think there's this scary thing about entrepreneurship where you start something and you fall in love with it, but you don't necessarily know if it's going to be the thing that gets you to the finish line. So I was in love with GRC. I loved being on the agency side, as crazy and psychotic as that sounds, because I just loved, the act of kind of uh, figuring out solutions for companies that were looking to grow. That's kind of where I excel, so to speak. And I was in love with that business, but I had to also accept, hey, KCC is getting bigger. It's got a bigger upside, and knowing how to transition that was something that it wasn't easy, but I made that choice.
Yeah, and even just making that choice in general with you and your brother, like where did that stem from? Because I know, just doing research in the past, like y'all would go there in the summers and winters for months at a time. And so you've obviously masala chai is like something that's been near and dear to you for a while, but as you guys like got older, what was like that sticking point where you're like, hey, let's actually try something out based on, our history and our past?
It's a great question. I think it was like many things. I think it happened very organically, and I think without any kind of intention to form a business, which is sounds crazy, today. But yeah, spent a lot of summers, a lot of time in Calcutta or Kolkata as a kid. Our parents are from there. Our grandparents lived there. Our entire ecosystem was there, and so it was a place that was home away from home. That was very confusing as a young child because uh, you're experiencing two different things in the Western world, and then when you go back home, it's like neither one is better or worse. It's just completely different. In back home in India, we had the warmth of family. We had all this cultural discovery. We had these new flavors and all these, visually, if you've ever been to, the Eastern hemisphere, so to speak, it's just so dynamic. You got so much going on. And then in the West, we had more of the normal comforts. There was water in the shower and, just normal things that were more comfortable, but not necessarily, as stimulating. And so we kind of tried to build that bridge all throughout our childhood. And then I think Kolkata Chai is that bridge between, your first generation kind of life in the West and then your cultural, foundation and how you grew up. So I don't know if I answered that question directly, but it was something that we grew up with chai, street food, would be those kids kind of sneaking out of the house or forcing our aunties to take us to the street food spot. And um, when my brother decided to go back to India for like a month in 2018. He was like, "Look, I'm taking a month off. I'm burnt out from the agency stuff. I just need to like, get in my bag." And I had no idea what that meant. And he ended up just traveling tea estates and started, talking to chai wallas on the street, and just very organically it became something that I think it was like magnetic for him. And when he came back and he was like, "Yo, I want to make chai," I was like, "I have no idea what that means." Like it was the most insane thing to think about because we were running a 6, 7 figure business at that time. Like it wasn't taking our eye off the focus was a very like, that had consequences. And so we built that business, the Kolkata Chai business, really slowly. And it just started with doing pop-ups and, taste tests and just figuring out like, do people care? And that was the genesis for kind of where we are today.
Yeah, can you describe that vibe a little bit? Being in India, being in Kolkata, and seeing just what the vendor, just what that scene is like. Because I heard chai is really big in the East when you think about spending time with other people and talking to other people. I've never personally been there before, but wanted to get your take on what that actual experience is like over there.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would highlight is street food vendors across South Asia and much of Asia and just that entire part of the world. They do so much with so little. They create these impossibly intricate flavors, complex Michelin star winning stuff with like an open flame and their hands. Like there's just no sophistication, but there's so much sophistication. And I think that inspired us a lot because it was like, wow, we don't have any excuse to not be able to figure this out. I mean, there's people doing a lot with less. And so I think that culture of just DIY, we call it like out the trunk, like selling mixtapes out the trunk, like that I think was like the biggest thing that inspired us. And then I think a lot of the acceptance that what you get on that side of the world you cannot get here. It's just not possible. Like you just even in a city like New York, you go to Jackson Heights, you go to Flushing, like you can get close. You can get in the arena, so to speak, but it's really hard to get some of those flavors. And I think that's where we started, when we were trying to construct that first cup of chai. It was like, how close can we get it? And I think we stayed meticulously close, to what we grew up with. And I think that made all the difference on this side of the world because people were like, I've never had anything like this. Like, this is not the chai I get at a big box cafe. This is not the chai that I get from the grocery store. Like, what is this? And I think that was just inspired by like, how close can we get to a 1-to-1 translation of these things that we grew up loving?
Yeah, that makes sense. And did you all start off before going brick and mortar? Did you start off just solely online, or were you not even selling online? Like, what was that story like as you're starting off?
Yeah, so we started off at a farmer's market. My brother used to set up a tent in a farmer's market, once a week for like 8, 9 months. And it was strictly about testing product and seeing what people liked. We developed a oat milk masala chai version in the farmer's market, after seeing that people were really kind of averse to dairy. And, now you go to like big cafe chains who I won't name in New York or anywhere, and you'll see A-frames for oat milk, like oat milk chai outside of their store. And I'm like, y'all weren't doing that before we did it. And that's okay. Like we can acknowledge that. but that all started in like a very organic environment, like farmers market testing. So no, there was no online before brick and mortar. There was simply pop-ups and farmers markets and food festivals, and just the physical manifestation of the product kind of in a uh, restaurant style setting. So there was no e-commerce, there was no CPG, there was no packaged good. That all came as a result and a response to the pandemic shutting New York City down and us needing to figure out how to keep our cafe afloat, because foot traffic had gone to zero. So that almost came out of a necessity rather than something
Mm.
that was on our product roadmap.
Yeah, that's interesting. And were you importing any product from India? Did you have to deal with that, or are you making everything? Oh, okay. So you were importing
We
from
were,
India.
yeah, we were importing, and we still do all of our black tea. All of our Assam tea is from India. The majority of our spices are from India. So I would say 80-90% of our ingredients are from India today. We were doing it then. I got to think about how we were sourcing back then. My brother had built some relationships with some suppliers on this side, and they were basically supplying us raw material that he was mixing up
That's crazy.
in his different proportions, which is crazy, right? Because you're getting like the raw, unadulterated tea. Like there's nothing on it. It hasn't been stepped on. Has Nothing's happened to it.
Damn.
And so we used to mix it by hand, not physically, like literally like shaking up jars, and it was like the most tedious thing ever, but it created the most fresh, flavor profile because it was like straight off the boat, straight into our mixer, straight to the customer. And so we've been able to scale that process. We don't do that in house anymore, but yeah, we were dealing with how to not compromise any point along that production
Mm.
process.
Because I'm sure there must have been hurdles too. Like, did you even have to go through like FDA hurdles or just get certain licenses even to do the farmers market? Because it sounds you're dealing with like ingredients like that, or not? Not really.
Yeah, you have to get, food safety and food handling permits and all that stuff. I think the
Mm.
biggest challenge was the New York City version of it. When you're opening a brick and mortar in New York City, food and bev, you're dealing with the Department of Health, you're dealing with the Department of Buildings, you're dealing with, health code and the tax man. And we went through so much, to get our first cafe opened. I don't even know if it feels kind of like reductionist to talk about it now because so much has happened since. But we were paying rent on our cafe while it was still in construction because we had exceeded like the 3 months that we had allotted for construction, right? Because of all these things that were coming up. So I remember that time being stressful as hell because it was money that we were taking out of the agency business, fueling the chai. I can't even call it a business because it wasn't even open yet, and so um, I can go on a long rant here, but I think what I'll summarize it as our decision to not take outside capital in order to open the first iteration of this was one of the most, I think, game changing things that we've done because it allowed us to create a proof of concept and get data on this phase one of the business without having any outside, you know, um, influence or obligation, right? So we were able to control that entire process and create a ton of value um, just by deciding to take the financial risk ourselves. So I always tell people like, 60K turned into 6 million. Like it was something that we created out the trunk again, but it was like our decision to be like, hey, let's invest our own money instead of going out to the public to be able to do this because we know we'll be able to reap the benefits of that later. So stressful times, but the decision to kind of self fund was, I think, the most pivotal thing, early on.
That's kind of like a big bet in yourself too, and for other folks, even for myself, because I'm very familiar with funding on like the tech world and the SaaS side of the house. But when it comes to bev and food and bev, like I actually have no idea how funding works there. Is it similar, same thing? You go to a VC? Are you actually taking out a loan? Like how does that stuff work?
These are all things that we had to figure out. We did end up raising an angel round in 2021, so we've raised about $1 million lifetime
Oh,
in
that's a sick angel round. Hell yeah. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it was a, it was a different time. 2021 was a best time for fundraising, and we definitely caught, the wave of it, and I'm very fortunate that we did. But yeah, to answer your question, the short and dirty answer is you can raise capital in whichever format makes sense for your business, right? So
Mm.
in a restaurant business, if you're able to cash flow, then taking debt makes sense because you can pay back your debt, you could pay down and pay back your debt over time as long as you know you're cash flowing. And therefore it's a non-dilutive kind of funding process. Raising equity has its advantages too, where, it allows you to not have to pay down debt while being able to develop, a product or flavors or a format. So the reason that we raised our round was to kind of professionalize our CPG product. So we had a version of our CPG product, and I don't know how deep you guys have been following, or how deep you know the story, but it used to be like a brown paper pouch that we would just buy wholesale, and we would hand stamp those things, and then we would fill them by hand with our tea and spice mix, seal them with a heat sealer by hand, and then sell these online. So we were able to do that without any capital, right? Because it was just like, yo, how do we build this ourselves? But when that thing started moving, a couple thousand units a month, it becomes a lot harder to now hand seal these. But we don't have enough money to go get a co-packer, rebrand it, find better packaging, all of those things. And so that's why we had to raise capital, was to fund the CPG side of it. So to answer the question for food and bev, if you're a pure play restaurant, you could do it with equity, you could do it with debt. Cash flow, I think, is the biggest thing that matters because, you know, restaurants are less complicated, right? There's less like valuation and, you know, there's less, what's it called? Exponential, forward looking revenue growth and all that. It's just like really simple. You can project out, but it's ones and twos. With CPG and other types of food, that you're thinking about direct to consumer, you're thinking about wholesale, you're thinking about grocery, you're thinking about, all these different channels and formats, which tend to create a more complex valuation and can lead to, kind of traditional venture funding being the way that a lot of companies go.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about the business too. And I was curious to hear your take, if looking back in time, starting off with brick and mortar versus direct to consumer, or maybe like sticking to online, and what the decision process was like when you're thinking about that. Uh, because I think both are very interesting. Like you talked about yourself, and when you think about food and bev, even if it's chai or if it's a coffee shop, you can kind of do a head count and do a forward projection of like how many cups you need to sell in order, to make revenue. Um, but in your case too, you had both options, right? So I was just curious, like looking back, what was the thought process there?
So I gotta be honest, like we did not set out to build like an omni-channel juggernaut that, investors look at today and they're like, wow, this is, you guys are so brilliant. Like part of it was just being in the right place at the right time and having the conviction behind the business model. So our decision to go brick and mortar first was the most unpopular decision for investors and for kind of the capital market at large, because brick and mortar doesn't really make money. If and that goes across cafes, restaurants, you go around New York City, and if you were to get a P&L, insight on restaurants that you love, you'd be like, damn, I'm surprised at how little money they make, just because of the capital intensive nature of the game, taxes,
Mm.
labor cost, all these things. But what brick and mortar did do, and what it did for us, was it was a way to create virality, content, community, conversations, and word of mouth in a way that built a moat around the brand that allowed us to then skip steps when it came to launching a direct to consumer product, because so many people were already primed and just waiting for Kolkata Chai to have something that I can make at home because I don't live in New York. Right.
So
So
yeah,
go
that's
ahead.
interesting what you just said right there. You're like you kind of viewed it as a multiplier, even though you all were in the digital space for a while, and people would just assume automatically that you'd stick there. You actually viewed the brick and mortar as a multiplier for what you want to do in the digital side,
Correct. Yep. And then
which is
today
nuts. That's
that's been
awesome.
validated, because our cost per acquisition is lower, our organic traffic and our organic word of mouth and those things drive so much revenue and so much discoverability and so much attention that it subsidizes, cost of acquiring new customers. For example, like you have a cafe. If Hassan Minaj decides to stop by the cafe, or Mindy Kaling stops by the cafe and creates a reel or post on Instagram, you've just created a ton of attention and awareness, and that you can then capture through advertising or through email capture and all these different things. That doesn't exist if you're strictly online. If you're strictly online and you know, Chrissy Teigen like shouts out your like soda, that's dope. Like, but people still have to decide to go transact online. That's a harder bridge than they're like, oh my God, like Hassan's at this cafe, like I gotta go. It's just like a culturally and emotionally, it's a different thing for humans. So I would say brick and mortar was something that we were just convicted on, and we stuck it out, and it was the right decision 4 years later. At the time, it was extremely difficult. Investors hated it. When we tried to raise in 2021, my brother and I, we opened the cafe with no staff. Like him and I just worked every shift for the first couple weeks and months. And I'm not someone that should be working at the cafe. No offense. Like I'm a horrible employee in a food and beverage setting. I don't know what I'm doing. Like I would just take orders and try to like keep the lines moving. And what I'm saying is it was not an efficient use of our time, but that's what was required to get the business off the ground. And then when we could afford it, we hired out, we hired up, and then today, we actually have like a functioning organization.
Yeah, that's dope. And talking about the 2021, and as you all are going scaling out a little bit, like when did the moves like omni-channel start to come into play? When you started to think about that CPG, you started to think about maybe going into like retail stores or different markets and whatnot. Like how did that all come about?
Yeah, we have been driving like low six-figure revenue on the direct to consumer side since 2020. So it was all of 2020 and all of 2021. And it was like we knew that there was an opportunity for that business to be bigger. We just didn't have the capital to be able to do it because we had self-funded ourselves up until that date. And so the decision to raise capital was strictly around how do we accelerate the direct to consumer business, because that adds a bigger multiplier to the valuation. And more importantly, we have such a massive brand, we're not taking advantage of it if we're just based in New York. We were shipping out chai for people in the Netherlands. Like we don't even ship internationally, but people were like, yo, my wife is from Kolkata, she needs this, like make my day, like please, I'll pay $500 for shipping. Like we were just dealing with like this crazy brand affinity. And I remember these things. I had to make this. My team was like, hey, are we authorized to ship this? Like they're paying us a couple $100 for shipping. I was like, what am I going to say? Like, let's do it. More importantly, I was like, man, if this type of fandom and this type of like fanatic attention exists for the brand, we need to monetize that, every day, not just a one-off to Holland or whatever. And so the fundraise was to accelerate the direct to consumer business. That business today is a mid to high seven-figure business. So we've been able to kind of prove that out.
Incredible.
It's growing profitably, which is really difficult in this time. And so, and again, direct to consumer was unpopular in 2022 and 23 because everyone was like, look, the COVID boom is over. We're all now moving to grocery. You need to get your chai in a can and go to grocery. And I was like, okay, how much is that going to cost me? They're like, well, don't worry about that. Like you'll have to give up half your company and raise the money, but it's worth it. And I was like, nah, that don't really seem right. So what I'm getting at here, and to synthesize a soundbite, so to speak, is like, if you're a founder looking to raise money for any type of company, I'll keep it to kind of food and bev, CPG, because that's what I'm qualified to speak on. Try to know what outcome you want before you go out and raise. Meaning, do you want to be a unicorn? Like you want to shoot for a Beyond Meat type of, like, you got this innovative product and you want to really go and you need like institutional capital to back you? Great. The outcomes may be varied, but if you know that that's what you want, go do that. But if you're trying to build a business that you can own, that you can monetize, that you can have generationally, or you can have for 5, 10, 20 years, profitable, build a sustainable business that you can live well off and also not have to be beholden to investors, then think about what type of capital you need and go build that business. Those two things are not the same. And I think what we did in food and bev was from 2021 to 2022 ish, whatever, 2, 3 years in that period, we decided that all food and bev needs venture funding. And now we're seeing that venture and just capital at that scale is not necessarily appropriate for food and bev. So I think what I'm saying as a founder, you got to really assess what type of business you have, what type of business you want to build before you go raise money, because equity is irreversible. It's technically it's possible, but it's very hard to reverse, dilution. And so, yeah, that's just one thing I always want to share.
Yeah, that is something super interesting because like I think so two companies that I know that eventually went private equity route and scaled out. You think of Kava, I think they did that day one. So Kava institutionally invested, and then we all know kind of Kava. They're just atypical brand. And then Sweetgreen, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure they started just brick and mortar, similar to y'all. Eventually made the decision to go private equity at some point in time because someone approached them, similar to maybe how you're getting approached today of different opportunities you can take. But I wanted to get your take on this because I thought it was really interesting. I was skimming through your TED Talk actually, and you were actually talking about this conversation in particular around making money and what it means to uh, like what that means to you, right? And which route you should take for the profitability, so to speak. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and your take on that and why that, like how you even had that mindset and drove you to do everything in house and make that decision with your brother as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Sweetgreen and Kava, real quick, I mean, those two companies, one of them's public. I'm not sure if I know Kava went public. I don't know if
Cabo
Sweetgreen's
Public,
public.
yeah.
I should know, but I mean, look, those companies are built by great operators. They've chosen to kind of go that path, and there's enough to say that they've been successful, but there's also a big question about profitability and kind of sustainability for both those businesses, and so they've done an incredible job, things that I'm not necessarily qualified to speak on. However, I know they're beholden to their investors, and that's not necessarily who I want to be. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of my thought process there. But again, they've they've taken niche concepts mainstream, and there's got to be, like, you got to tip your cap to that. For me, I think when you don't grow up with money, money becomes a very elusive thing because you don't know how to get it. It's a scarcity mindset thing. You become intimidated by money. I know in my family growing up, and even to this day, sometimes it's something I gotta like shake my dad about. Money is a very intimidating thing. And so I had to make a decision or just get to that point in my early 20s or mid 20s about how do I reframe my relationship with money. And I think it took me until my early 30s to understand, like, money is not elusive. It's not scarce. It's just you have to figure out what you can provide the world to to keep earning. Basically, what is your unique um, ability to earn? Like, what do you know that you can leverage? And I think that as first generation immigrant kids, we were never taught that. We were taught that you got to go get a job and go do, options one, two, or three. Those are the only ones. And these are things that are going to, make you the most money. No one ever told us about what happens when you get laid off from options two and three. What happens when you don't advance the way you want to? What happens when you make it to option one, but you got six figures of debt? Nobody had, our parents didn't have that nuance because they were figuring it out for the first time. Like, we can't blame them. I just knew that that model was off as a kid. I spent time, I was 12 years old studying, I don't know, Jay-Z and Rockefeller Records and figuring out how to build an independent business. Like, I was weird like that, and I still am. But, it got me here. I was trying to figure out, like, no, this doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not going to go punch in for somebody only for them to lay me off just so that I can say that I make money. Like, that's not making money. That's like lending out your time. That's someone else owning your time and you getting compensated for, you know, giving them your time. Like, that was That to me was like the wackest of all formulas. And so I think, kind of just to bring it to your point about my relationship with money and how I think about money today, it's like, as long as I'm confident that I have a product or a service or the ability to earn, the actual dollar amount doesn't really mean much to me. My brother and I are both not the highest paid people at our own company. Like I say that with pride. Like it doesn't, it's not something that we need or that we care about, because I think we're so obsessed with generating the value to be able to say, this company is worth this, and this year we earned this much in EBITDA, and this is how much, we can now decide what we want to do with that, instead of, oh, we raised 10 million, but I only own 10% of my company, and my investor owns this, and I really just work for my investor. There's so much nuance to this. And so, for me, at some point in my life, I think late 20s, early 30s, I became more obsessed with just like the process and figuring out what I was actually able to contribute to the world rather than how much money I made. And, there's this classic adage of like, you flatline your expenses and you kind of, invest all of that in building, and so, my company's gotten bigger every year and my lifestyle hasn't changed. That's just the discipline that I think it takes to be a founder. Some people have it, some people don't. There's no judgment there. It's just like knowing what you want. So yeah, very complex, nuanced, long-winded answer to say, changing your relationship with money, especially as a first generation kid, I think is something that everyone should explore early on, because it really sets the foundation for and who you are and what you do.
I love that personally because me and Ron's are both first generation immigrants too. You and Ron's both went to NYU. I went to Rutgers, but it's the same thing. Like my parents are like, yeah, you're going to be a computer engineer and you're going to get that degree and then you're going to be a software engineer, yada, yada. I went through that path. But I was curious from your standpoint because I did want to dive into that a little bit. Like even coming out of college, so went to NYU, coming out of college, you had the typical work experience. Like what was that first job again? Actually, before I dive into this part, the first job that you ever had out of college?
I never have worked a real job. I worked at a consulting gig for 2 weeks out of college, and then I quit. And then I've never held a real 9 to 5 since then. That,
You quit
that's
2 weeks in. Is that
I gave 2 weeks, and I was like, yeah, I can't do this. They were like, we know you can't do this because you're not even doing a good job. And I was like, all right, I'm out. They're like, please be out. Um, it was embarrassing at that time, but I think it was a very big leap for me, but we talk about that later. So I've never really had a formal 9 to 5. And I say that not proudly. I say that to say my coming out of college, and I don't want to derail your question, but
I'd love to hear this though. Yeah, no, this is awesome. Yeah.
my coming out of college, I went to NYU, I went to B school. My friends graduated, became bankers, private equity folks, investment analysts, wealth, management. And I was running an independent record label at that time, and I was making no money trying to build out a collective of artists and figuring out what it meant to be a freelancer or an independent artist or building a business for yourself. And I used to just work odd jobs, uh, marketing gigs off of Craigslist. I was teaching creative writing for a program in Harlem. Like I was doing whatever I could do to make sure I could pay my rent so I could spend all of my other time building my business. And that was what I did from 20. It started when I was 18, but I did that all through college and until I was about 25 years old. And then I was like, hold on, I'm making no money. I got to figure something else out. But yeah, so I didn't have a typical post-college, get a job, work a 9 to 5, punch in and out. I don't even know what that's like.
And how'd your parents feel about that, if you don't mind me asking?
My parents are funny. My parents I give them so much credit because they never, that I can remember, they never expressed any like approval or any like dismay. Like it wasn't about like, hey, we approve of this or we hate this. They weren't happy about it, but they were just like very neutral about it. And the deal was, as long as I could pay my own expenses, my own rent, never asked them for a dollar, then you can't really tell me anything about what I'm doing. That was like that was
Mm.
my rule to them, and they were like, "Well, we don't know what to tell you. You're going to do whatever you want anyway." So I say that to say my parents have always been extremely um, respectful with like, we don't know what he's doing, and we don't necessarily think it's the best path, but we're not going to meddle and like tell him what he can or can't do. And I think, today we can see the ultimate payoff of what that trust, and just like implicit understanding that I would figure it out has led to. But yeah, they weren't happy, but they weren't like, yo, you have to get a job. Like no one ever, my dad never called me and were like, yo, you got to get a job. Like it
Yeah.
was like, what are you doing? But sure.
How was that? How was that mentally too for you? I guess at that time period, like, what were your mental thoughts? What was going on in your head of like what you wanted to do?
It wasn't fun to be, in your early 20s and be next to broke. Like it was just not fun.
Mm.
At the same time, it was the most creative and the most like energetic, that I've ever been. Like I used to manage a collective artist. I used to make music myself. I used to book shows. I was the first person who brought Wiz Khalifa to New York City for his first show ever.
No way,
And it was
really.
like I was barely old enough to get into the club that we were booking. And I remember that feeling of like, damn, I figured this out, like from A to Z. Figured out how to call them, figured out how to pay for it, figured out how to book the venue, figured out how to have 400 people in line, and figured out how to put my act as the opening act to be able to get all the press and the awareness around that event. And then when I quit that job that I mentioned post college 2 weeks in, and then like 3 months later, I got an offer to go tour in Tokyo, in Japan, for 2 weeks. And these were things that I was like, if I can do this, like, I don't, I just need to give myself the time and the belief that like I can figure this out.
Mm.
So it was this very mixed experience where I was living this like really dynamic, rich life as a creative person and as a young entrepreneur figuring it out. But we had mice in the crib running around. We used to, we used to like all pitch in on one bowl of pasta. Like it was like nasty in terms of how like meager it was. But I still think about that like time as, yo, I can't go back to that. Like that still fuels me to this day to be like, no, you need to figure out how to hustle because you cannot go back to that. Um, but yeah, I lived in a real, uh, just a really DIY, figure it out, do or die environment for my entire 20s, entire early to mid 20s, until I took all of what I learned during that time and I was like, all right, we're going to formalize this into an agency. We're going to go pitch clients. We're going to go do all this. And it was like, well, this is easy. I used to have to survive off of, $5 a week. Like this, running an agency and billing a client, $5 grand a month, like this is easy. So, yeah, long winded story to say, I didn't take the traditional route of, working a banking job and then deciding to start my own company or going to grad school and, meeting my co-founder. Like we were on the road, like touring, selling CDs, T-shirts, hand to hand, out the trunk, literally, um, building a business and learning what it meant like to really build something from zero.
That's awesome. What I really love, especially, is that you first started off. You could tell in your face, like, ah, shit, it was a lot. But then your face lit up immediately when you're like, but it was really creative. It was a really creative time period.
Yeah.
It kind of, what's also interesting, because you even mentioned that Wiz Khalifa thing, right? And you're curating an experience in person, is kind of how I viewed what you said.
Mm.
Do you think that's why that also translate, like subconsciously, that translated to why you really felt like Kolkata had to be in person as well? Because from the sounds of it, you're a very in person kind of guy.
It's a great question. I think the key word there is community. Right now, that's become a buzzword. But to your point, yeah, I've never thought about it that way. But my ability to build community and give people identity or make them feel like they're part of something bigger, has maybe always been implicit in what I've done and never thought about until now. But no, I think it's the sense of community that definitely has been my strength. I don't know how to program. I can't tell you about coding or scaling or crypto or hedging or staking or whatever. Like, yeah, I know functionally what those things are, but I know that those aren't what I'm good at. And so I think I've just always played to what I've been good at, and that's been bringing people together.
Yeah, I feel that. I'd love to hear you too. I would love to hear too about you and your brother in that relationship because I have two brothers. My younger brother, actually, me and him are starting up a company. We've been working on, but I'm about to quit my job in a couple weeks. I could say it now because it's
You'll
in
be
here in a
done by
couple
the time
weeks.
this is out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working with my younger brother now. He's in Berkeley. He's smart as shit. Honestly, I'm really proud of him. And I live with my other brother, my older brother as well. So like family is a really big thing for me. I'd love to hear about you and your brother's relationship too. What's it been like working in business, the trials and tribulations? Like, I
Yeah.
love to hear about that.
Yeah. I could talk about it all day. I think as fun as it is to build a company, I think the real gift of this journey has been able to do it with family and do it with my brother and kind of seeing us both evolve, and get to a point where uh, we have an opportunity to do something, you know, massive, and we have the opportunity to do it together. I know that's also been like just maybe the most important thing for my parents, is being able to see their, children still together and to be this close. I know that means a lot to my mom. But it hasn't been easy. I think the truth of it is working with family is always, a double-edged sword because there's an implicit trust and an implicit ability to keep going. Like you can't fire, your brother in the sense of like he's always going to be your brother or your sister or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to keep accountability in family because of the fact that you know everything about that person. You're so close to them. It's like, well, how do you talk to them if they're not doing their job? And that's like
Mm.
something that my brother and I dealt with. He's 4 years younger, and he's always been a little bit more. He colors outside the lines a little bit more than I do, if we can put it that way. So we had a lot of tension early on in our first agency business where I would be like, you got to be in the office early. You got to stay late. We got to like figure this out. Like there's no like lifestyle right now. Like we're just building. And he was like, nah, I'm not doing that. Like I'm coming in when I want, leaving when I want. I'm going to the gym. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm like, what are you doing? Like this is all we have. Like how are you not 150% in like I am? And we clashed a lot over that. And it went in seasons, and we used to fight, and sometimes it got really bad. And then I think the pandemic, kind of what it took to kind of survive COVID, just like forced us to be like, like face to face, be like, yo, what are we doing? Like, are we gonna let anything get between us right now? Or are we gonna figure it out? And we started going to therapy individually. We've been to therapy together. We've, been really honest with each other about this is what I need from you, and tell me what you need from me. I've changed my behavior. He's changed his behavior. We've figured that out, and so today we don't argue. We disagree, but we don't argue. We don't fight. We clash. Like we have conflicting opinions about things, but we don't fight. Um, we get frustrated with each other, but we don't let it build or build into like build into or turn into resentment. We just resolve it and we move on. And it's been a real, it's just been a gift, honestly. And I look forward to the day that we can, I don't know, be on a private island or something somewhere and be like, damn, like we really did that with no, kind of like guidance or mentorship, or like no one's really been there to be like, yo guys, like go this way, do this thing, do that thing, like it's just
Yeah,
been us figuring it out. And so yeah, long story short, if you put the time into that relationship with siblings, I think it can be the biggest gift in the world.
that's awesome. And I think it's a testament too. He comes back from India and he's actually hitting you up first about, like, let's do something crazy.
He goes, let's do something crazy, and I was like, I'm not in that space right now. And then it was like a month or two and he wasn't doing anything. And I was like, what happened to let's do something crazy? You're not even doing nothing. And I basically told him, I was like, you got to do something or you got to shut up about it. Like you can't just like talk about it. And we had this, like, I still remember this conversation. I remember where I was. I remember all of it. I was just like, yo, like, if you're about it, do it. Like, show me and show the world that you could actually turn this into something. Otherwise, just like make tea at home and like stop talking about it.
Yeah.
And he took that personally. You know, he was like, all right, it's time to go. So yeah,
You kind of remind me of my older brother, honestly. He's running his own company right now, but he kind of had the same attitude. I was lucky and fortunate that I learned at a young age, like from him and what he was doing. But
yeah. Older
uh,
brothers have it tough, man, especially first gen older brothers, you know, that like they dealt with everything from their parents, right? This is a Hassan Minaj joke in here somewhere about like just being that older sibling. You deal with everything, you know, for the first time. And so, yeah, I have taken the blows, I've taken all the arrows, and now I'm like, I'm comfortable with being able to help other people kind of get through it.
even in like growing up, my brother would tell me crazy stories about him in the back of the bus with a bunch of his friends. I was like 8 years old, and I was hearing all this crazy stuff. We grew up in a pretty diverse community, like
Yeah.
really early before we moved out. But uh, that's super funny. And thinking about forward thinking now and looking at the future of what you all are trying to do, like uh, or I guess day to day right now, I would be really curious to hear your day to day now. Like, what are the kind of things that are keeping you up at night right now on things that you have to do?
Yeah. I mean, look, I am a master of routine slash a obsessed with routine. I think that is the foundation for being able to be a strong executive, a leader. And so my day to day, every day is different, but every day is the same. Meaning, you know, spend the first 2 hours of my day meditating and exercising. Like that's me time. And if I don't get that time, I don't really get any time to myself in the day. So I have to kind of center myself. That's been probably about 3 years in the process now. So it started during COVID and it's continued. And I'm very thankful that I can keep that routine going. So first 2 hours of the day, I wake up, you know, about 7:30, 8, leave for the office around 9:30, 10 in the morning. And then day to day is just a smattering of meetings, calls, strategy time, you know, kind of like what I block out time to just be creative and think about things that have to happen next. I think the challenge of being a CEO and a leader is at some point as your organization grows, you go from being an IC, from being an individual contributor to being a manager to being a, you know, strategist and a visionary. And it happens very slowly until it's like one day you're just like, wait, I didn't do any work today. And it's like, you did a lot of work today. It's just you didn't actually create a Facebook ad or, you know, like build a landing page or, you know, post on social media because other people did those things. But the strategy behind that was all determined by you or, you know, your team or whatever. So my 5 day a week is kind of just it's that I spend half the week in our warehouse where I basically sit alongside the warehouse team and just I do my own work, but I'm in that environment making sure things are going smoothly, and then spend the back half of my week at our office in Five I'll make it to the cafes maybe like once or twice a month. It's pretty bad right now. Like I don't have that much time, but the weekend, usually Sunday, is spent going to the cafe, taking notes, talking to people, seeing what's going on, thinking about what needs to be improved. Um, and then what's keeping me up at night right now is our business has scaled tremendously. Well, it's scaled 4x year over year for the past like 2 or 3 years. And with that growth comes the need to fuel that growth, meaning you got to, you know, buy bigger inventory buys, you need to hire more people, and you're basically spending more money while you're growing. But it's not always in tandem. So sometimes you know, you might put out a bunch of cash and then you're able to recoup that a quarter, two or 2 quarters or 3 quarters down the road. And so my priority right now is like the financial health of this business and kind of navigating a very high growth period while deciding to be a company that doesn't want to raise venture. And so if we're talking just today, like what I've been dealing with for the past like 4 6 weeks, it is that. It is figuring out how do we bring in non-dilutive capital into the business to keep our growth up? How do we continue to bring in the talent that we need to grow the business, but not bloat our headcount? How do we, open more locations and kind of extend the brand out without taking on expensive leases. It's just like this dance between um, going from college basketball to the league. It's like this transition time that I'm navigating.
You're grinding. You're just straight up grinding. So, it sounds like I remember my CEO when I first joined this company. He used to be my direct manager, and like the first thing, this was his first time being a manager, so it started off with him always asking me every day, like, "Hey, are you happy to be here?" And then now we're like, what, near 100 employees, and like he's just would have never. The things he's doing now are just so vastly different than what he was doing just 2 3 years ago. You know what
Right.
I mean? And it's so funny to hear your story because it's like anyone that wants to get into entrepreneurship, like there's beauty in the struggle, but you're definitely gonna have to grind. You know, if you really care about something, and I think
Yeah.
you're definitely a testament to that. I was curious, like when you think about, because the way I see it too, you're kind of operating like two separate businesses in a sense, which is a lot of like the logistics around the brick and mortar and then the logistics around CPG. Like, would you be able to paint a picture for people listening right now of the things you have to like worry about and how logistics work for each side of the business? Because I would also be really curious to hear about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm lucky again that my brother is a strong co-founder. He manages the entire brick and mortar and product side of it, so I would not know what I'm doing in that world, and I'm lucky that he knows exactly what he's doing in that world. So, yeah, I mean, division of the business is basically he handles brick and mortar product, he manages the team on the cafe side, and the menu development. All of those things are in his realm, and on my side, we have the marketing, branding, content, CPG, e-commerce, direct to consumer, brand growth. All of those things are kind of on my side of the business, and I think I mean, I harken back to like just the age old saying of like, you gotta be in your zone of genius. You gotta know what you're good at, and you need to hire for your weaknesses. And luckily, I don't have to hire for it because my brother is the co-founder, so he knows what I don't know, and vice versa. But um, managing a business with multiple channels and arms is complicated operationally, but I think if you're telling a clear story and like your ethos as a business is obvious, there's a lot of overlap that you don't have to worry about. And what I mean by that is, people know when they're coming to the cafe or they're buying online, they're getting the best cup of chai, started by two people from the culture, high quality, most likely have seen it on social. There's like this cultural kind of component to it. Those things exist kind of whatever channel. You see it at a coffee shop, you see it on a grocery store, you see it online, you go into the cafe, kind of what the brand is about. Or at least I think I'd like for you to know what the brand is about. And that comes through some of like the top down storytelling and brand building, that is the most important thing that connects all the channels.
What about the dirty work too? Like, is it like handling inventory, for instance? Is that a pain in the ass? Like, how does that?
Is it? Yeah, the dirty work is, I mean, it's something, I mean, I do so much of it every day that it's almost like I can't differentiate between dirty and clean sometimes. I mean, the truth is, the dirty work, all right, I'll say this. My brother and I have done every function of this business at some point in its, 5-year history. We have, I mean, we've literally made the product, which is whole one thing, but we've counted inventory. We've cleaned the bathrooms. We've ran the Facebook ads. We've answered customer complaints. We've done every single thing. We've put up drywall because there was something broken. Like we've done everything. So I think when you've done everything before, you know who to hire and kind of how to hire out for it. And you also know how to evaluate if they're doing a good job or not.
Yeah.
So, today I don't count inventory. My warehouse manager does, but I know the questions to ask him, or I know, how to answer questions from him because I've done it at some point before. And so I think that's the short of the long is depending on how you build a business, I think every founding team should touch every part of the business at some point because that gives you the ultimate understanding of how to do it the right way or not.
And like strategy or not, that makes a ton of sense. And the almighty question to all of us that we were talking about, forward thinking, looking back, if you were to do this all over again, same business. I'm curious. I'm not gonna ask you like would you do it or not, because I know that can be a tough one. I'm curious, like if you were to do this all over again, what would your blueprint be? Like, what would you do? Someone else thinking about doing something similar, like food and bev, they want to do it themselves. Like, what route would you take? How would you